Jefferson Robbins with NCW Life. The 12th Legislative District has gone through some changes in recent years, redrawn twice to encompass more communities on the west side of the Cascades, including Snoqualmie, North Bend, and Monroe. In the process, the district dropped Douglas County, Okanogan County, others that had always been part of the constituency. Partly as a result of that redistricting, State Senator Brad Hawkins is leaving his seat at the end of this term, leaving the door open for new representation. Keith Goehner of Dryden is the Republican candidate who has stepped up. Jim Mayhew of Snoqualmie is the Democratic contender on this November's ballot. They're both with us now. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us, yes.
We really appreciate it. I'm going to start with Keith because you have first position on the ballot. You have 1 minute to simply introduce yourself as if you were an unknown quantity. Who are you and what do you do?
Well, I am Keith Goehner. I live in Dryden. I've been a pear grower for the last 48 years, actually, and prior to that I taught school. My wife and I raised our family. We've got 3 children and 8 grandchildren, and we've really enjoyed living in the valley. And my public service has been as a school board member, and then I served 4 terms as Chelan County Commissioner. Now most recently I've been 3 terms in the State House of Representatives. One of the reasons I've been involved in political life is because I really want to leave things better than I found them. And I want to give my contribution to society, be willing to give and to serve, and as I said, try and meet needs that people have. That's always been my goal, and I continue to look at legislation in that way. How can we help people find more opportunity and have a better life here in the state of Washington?
Thank you, Keith. And Jim, I'll throw the same question to you if you would. Introduce yourself in 1 minute.
Okay, in 1 minute. I live in Snoqualmie, which is the west side of our district. About half the district now is on the west side of the mountains. Half is on the east side of the mountains. So I live in Snoqualmie, rural King County, East King County, and I've been on the Snoqualmie City Council for the last 6 years there. I grew up with a single mother, often living below the poverty line, and as a teenager I ended up in foster care. I graduated from Roosevelt High School in Seattle, and worked for a few years, saved up money for college, and I say put myself through the University of Washington, but thank God for Pell Grants and the generous help that we get in the state of Washington for in-state residents. Graduated with a degree in accounting, went on to a 30-year career in corporate financial management, mostly with large corporations, and then retired young about 6 years ago, went on the Snoqualmie City Council, and was redistricted just 4 months ago.
A question that would go to you first, Jim, if I could. What do you think, in 2 minutes, is the most important issue facing the 12th District right now?
Well, hard to pick one. I think affordability, if I had to say it broadly, that has a bunch of aspects to it. Affordable housing, affordable childcare, available childcare. I think issues with funding our schools, but broadly affordability, and especially here in Chelan County in Wenatchee, where we're sitting, costs have gone up very quickly. We've got a bunch of reasons driving that, including folks moving from out of the area into the area because it's so desirable to live here, and with telecommuting they can do that. But we're just not keeping up with that demand, and so affordability is coming out in a whole bunch of different ways. Childcare, which I mentioned in there, we're meeting about a third of the childcare that is demanded, and so what that means is folks, actually about 25% of parents report that they didn't take a job or didn't take a promotion or left job training or school, school meaning higher education, because they couldn't get childcare. So, by the way, that doesn't just hurt those families, that hurts all of us because those people aren't out in the community contributing to our society. So, yeah, affordability, we've got to do a lot better. A lot's being done. Affordable housing, we're meeting about a quarter of the new demand each year, so we're falling farther and farther behind. We've got to do a better job at solving affordability.
Jim, thank you very much. Keith, from your perspective, the most important issue facing the 12th District right now?
Well, I would agree with Jim that there's really not one. I would say the 12th District is really being challenged in different ways, because on the west side, the median income is much higher, but the cost of housing, is also a big issue for people on the west side. The east side, we talk a lot about trying to keep people in their communities, and that really is a real challenge because of the housing supply. Whether you're in Leavenworth or Sultan or wherever, I mean, we really do have challenges, and it's a statewide issue, but it also really affects the 12th. On the east side, as I mentioned about as far as the median incomes, we really don't have the same types of jobs as some of the areas on the west side, but the people that are living in the more rural areas and trying to find a home and raise their family and be a part of the community that maybe they were raised in and they'd like to stay in is a real challenge. So, I think we have to be looking at land use, because that is a major player in how we provide housing. And some of that, has a lot to do with local government's ability to plan for the projected increase and for the people that are actually here. So I think that, and then I also think that we need to talk about, public safety. That's a real concern that people have too. In some ways it doesn't seem to be as big of an issue on the east side as I understand on the west side, but it is something, once again, that when we talk about law enforcement and keeping adequate security within our communities, that's a major concern that people have.
Well, Keith, you're a sitting legislator, so your votes are no secret, but what are some decisions that you think were made by the legislature in the past session that you disagreed with? Maybe the ones you most strongly disagreed with?
Well, there are a number of things as I try and think right now as to what I disagreed with. I would start out by saying that there's so much that was agreed upon, but when it does come time to make some critical decisions, there are obviously some disagreements. In the operating budget, we really didn't get a chance to see it prior to about 72 hours, I think maybe, or 48 hours before the session ended. So we really didn't get a chance to even look at some of the commitments that the state was going to make within that operating budget, and I did vote no on that because of a number of things that we knew were in there. I think that on the transportation side, it's important for us to take a good hard look at where we're going with our infrastructure, because that is a core function of government, is to provide an infrastructure. That's something that the private sector is not going to do. So some of the decisions that were made, although we did vote to approve that, I would disagree with some of the priorities that we have. I would like to see us readjust and reframe some of the direction that we're going and how we're spending the money. Some of the social issues that we had, some of the penalties that we've continued to decrease. I believe it's really important for people to be accountable for their actions, because it does have an impact on others in their community. And if we continue to, as I say, not hold people accountable for the things that they've done, then it does have a detrimental effect. So when we talk about child care, there were some things where even permitting, having, that once again gets into the land use, trying to hit specific things that we need to see within our communities. We were having a difficult time getting some of those bills passed that would have allowed for more flexibility in the permitting of some facilities.
Well, Jim, a similar question to you. It's a democratically controlled legislature, and you're running as a Democrat, but were there some decisions made by the legislature this past session that you just disagreed with and thought, if I had been there, I would have voted differently?
Yeah, so yes. I think being a legislator, so last 6 years I was on a city council, Snoqualmie City Council, a city about half the size of Wenatchee. And you don't run as a Republican or Democrat. So you don't actually know what party affiliation the other, in my case, the other 6 members have. So it turns out that fixing potholes isn't particularly partisan. And so, yes, I disagreed with exactly how, but we find ways to compromise. And so I think when we look at kind of the state budget, remember there are three budgets. There's a capital budget, transportation budget, and an operating budget. The first two require 60% majority to pass. And so the Democrats don't have a 60% majority. The operating budget only requires a 50% majority. But in terms of things I disagree with, the biggest thing is the priorities. And when I say that, I'm talking about from the perspective of a rural district like ours, the 12th District. So even where I live, Snoqualmie, East King County, but rural, surrounded by farms. The next nearest city to us is 20 minutes away. That's Issaquah. So if we need backup on whether it's police or fire or anything else, that's just like many of the communities across the 12th. That help is a little far away. So what we need to do is prioritize how we solve problems in our communities. And by the way, think about affordable housing, great transit-oriented development in a place like Bellevue. Well, we don't have that anywhere in the 12th. So we need solutions that work for us in rural communities, and that's where really my disagreements come as the focus.
One of the things you brought up is the supermajority requirement for certain votes, and there is such a requirement on school districts when they want to pass their bonds, which pay for very important infrastructure and construction. This year, the Eastmont School District, just outside of your district, tried twice to pass $117 million in bond improvements, and the voter approval topped out both times, right around 59%. They really need this new construction. So, Jim, do you think the supermajority threshold for school districts should be removed so that they have a clearer path to win those needed funds?
I absolutely do. Now, there was a proposal by a Republican in the legislature last session to drop it down to 55%. If we could have found a way to coalesce around 55%, I would have been in favor of that. 60% is too high. Fundamentally, I don't understand why in a democracy, if a majority of us want to do something, if we want to tax ourselves to make our local schools better, then we ought to be able to do that. We talk a lot about where's the control sit. I'm in favor of local control. Our cities, our school districts know best how to meet the needs of our communities. So requiring us to hit a 60% threshold isn't really letting us control things locally. So I absolutely like to see that. And here's the thing. The districts that can't pass at 60%, and by the way, don't just focus on Eastmont. When Wenatchee School District couldn't pass their last one, they didn't even try again. Same with Chelan. So this is a bigger problem than just Eastmont. By the way, in Eastmont, they're trying to refurbish 3 elementary schools, the most recent of which was refurbished 35 years ago. So you can't tell me that our kids in those schools, nothing against the teachers, we've got great teachers, but you can't tell me that our kids are getting the same education as kids over in school districts with brand new schools. So we need to fix that. We do have a problem with operating budgets and how we fund just the operating budget. Eastmont's not done dealing with their issues. They've already closed a school. They've got more money to cut out of the budget. So part of the problem is declining enrollment. It's true, but part of the problem is our per pupil amounts are just not keeping up with inflation. We're increasing 1 or 2% a year. Inflation is much higher than that, as we all know, in our personal budgets. So yeah, we've got to get rid of supermajority requirement in order to fund schools so that our kids get the same opportunity as kids anywhere else in the state.
Keith, you've served on a school board, as you mentioned. Does the 60% supermajority need to come down? Is it an impediment, or should it stay there as a way to best represent the taxpayers' interests?
Well, you know, I would, at this point, I feel like the 60%, you know, has been there for you know, quite some time, and it does. We've had a number of levy failures throughout, you know, the course of time. I served, you know, in a district where my service was on the Cascade Education Foundation, which was formed because the levy did not pass. We as parents, we got involved. We started, you know, increasing the funding. We did get people to contribute to the schools because of the very thing that there were, you know, a vast number of people that were committed to good education. So I think that the 60%, you know, particularly when you consider who's paying the tax, I mean, those are property taxes. It's also something that the state holds itself to at that same standard. We have to have that 60% to pass past budgets. The idea is that we're trying to reach a plan, or in the case of the facilities, you're trying to find the facilities that best suit the district itself. Unfortunately, we do have some districts that they have some real demands from an enrollment standpoint, but they don't have the tax base to support it. I mean, when you think about what will be happening here in Wenatchee with the new data centers and all of the additional tax revenue, that will be great for the Wenatchee School District. You see what's happened in Quincy, the type of facilities that come as a result of an increased tax base. But when people are already being challenged to make ends meet and to put food on the table and to clothe their kids and keep the roof over their head, I mean, I think it's really important that we make sure that the plan matches the ability of the community to pay for it. So that is a concern for me.
I'm sorry, Jim, was there a response you wanted?
Well, yeah, I
1 minute, sir.
would just sort of add that this whole question, whether it's the state transportation budget or the capital budget, or specifically what we're talking about, school capital budgets, 34 states don't have a 60% majority requirement. So we have a lot of experience. And so the question is, did that result in taxes going higher? And it doesn't. It turns out that we've got plenty of checks and balances, and we can see this by how it's operating in all of those states, that if local officials try to raise taxes too much, they'll get pushed back and they'll get tossed out. We all know how to vote. We get to vote every 2 years on city councils, and then on the other on the even years on state representation. So it doesn't turn out that that's somehow protecting us from having too high taxes. So I really think, let a community decide what it wants to fund, and let's get rid of this 60% supermajority that really all it's doing is hurting the least wealthy of our districts, and let's fix that.
Keith, I'd offer you a minute to respond if you need.
Well, I think the problem is always the devil's in the details, because when we're talking about taxing, and that's, if we had a comprehensive discussion about taxing and how schools were funded and how they were built, and the school construction fund was brought into this, and the state made commitments beyond what they are right now, that would be a different conversation. But when you're asking, small communities sometimes that they have a pretty good pulse on what's going on in their schools, and oftentimes it may not be that they're voting the levy down because they're in disfavor of what's going on in the schools, but there is an obligation that they just do not feel like they can meet. That's why I think it's very important that there be clear communication as to what we're offering, what our kids need, and I think that that's where the state has to be more involved in providing some funding in ways that we're not doing at this current time.
Washington seems to always have big conversations about educational funding and what the state's responsibility is. I hope our next state senator can help fix that. To move on to another question regarding previous legislation, House Bill 2118 is now law. This is a bill that established additional requirements for firearms dealers, including background checks for their employees, bars and grates for security when they're not in operation, locked storage vaults, surveillance systems, and other measures. At least one business here in Wenatchee, which sells firearms and also a lot of other stuff, has said it has to stop selling firearms because those restrictions are going to be too expensive for them to put into place. Keith, I'd ask you, does 2118 need to be revisited?
Well, as far as revisiting it, it's unfortunate that particularly the business that you're referencing, who have not had any issues. They do have things secured. They did. I mean, they just don't meet the new standards. So you could revisit it and maybe adjust some of the requirements of that bill. I do feel like what we've done in the state in the 6 years that I've been there, we've continually had more gun bills that have restricted the use. It hasn't had an effect on actual statistical way it's played out. But I do think that, the intent, I understood the intent, but, in this case, I would say that what was being done here, the fact that it makes it cost prohibitive for people to have the business, I think that it would make, maybe there could be some tweaking to the bill that would still provide the security that was intended without being overly burdensome.
Jim, again, this is a law that places additional restrictions on commercial firearms dealers. Does it need to be looked at again in a new session of the legislature?
Yeah, so here's our issue. The #1 cause of death of children and teens in the state of Washington is firearms. More than vehicle accidents, more than any other cause. 70% of all gun deaths are suicides. Many of those by people who were able to get access to guns that weren't theirs and use it to commit suicide. By the way, another 28% are homicides, many of those involving domestic violence. So that's 98% of all gun deaths. We need to do more to stop this epidemic of gun deaths and to protect our children. So yes, I have absolute sympathy for businesses that are incurring additional costs in trying to meet these, but the most important thing here in this discussion is protect our kids, protect all of us from gun violence.
For many years, we talked about something in Washington politics called the Cascade Curtain, where politics was distinct to the east side of Washington and from what it is on the west side. The 12th District, also the 8th Congressional District, now cross the Cascades. The two of you live at either end of a fairly diverse district. So Jim, I'd stick with you for this question. What makes you think that you can fairly represent the constituents of the 12th despite the geographic size and distinction between the various communities that you'd be representing?
Yeah, I gave a lot of thought to this before I decided to run. Although I was just redistricted in April, I didn't have much time to make my decision. But the thing is, as I've been running for these last 6 months, what I've discovered is that this district has a surprising amount in common. So, in fact, the city I live in, Snoqualmie, has relatively little in common on a lot of these kind of issues, especially the ones we've been talking about so far. Relatively little in common with, say, Bellevue or even Issaquah, and a heck of a lot in common with places like Leavenworth or Wenatchee or Chelan, or Monroe or anywhere up the Skykomish Valley. And so it turns out what's true of the whole district now is it's rural districts, small cities, and towns. A city of 35,000, our biggest city, Wenatchee, that's not a big city. I know it feels like it for those of us living here, but compared to other cities, it's a small city. And there's a lot of towns in rural areas. So I'm really excited about the notion of a Democrat carrying a rural district and then being the voice inside the majority caucus, right? So, right, in our state, tends to be that Republicans carry rural districts, Democrats carry urban districts, and then for a lot of the discussion, we sort of are coming from different places. What I think would be fantastic is to be on the inside of the majority caucus talking about what we need to do, because by the way, you can win a district. To hold that district, you need to deliver on those issues. So I'd love to be part of a Democrat delivering on rural issues, which I think are common across both sides of the district.
And Keith, representing such a big, broad district, you think you can carry it off despite the size and the distinctiveness between communities?
Well, I have been doing it for the last 2 years. It's, this has changed a little bit because of the most recent change in the lines. But I think that what we do have are a lot of commonalities across the Cascade Curtain, as you said. The fact that when you look at the areas that where there's some farming going on. I mean, there's just the rural feel that you have for the cities that are not, as was mentioned, they're not big cities, but they do have a different feel than that urban landscape. So I think that, you know, we certainly have a lot in common, and I'd say more in common than we do have differences. So yes, I believe that you know, that we really need to have a voice, though, of that rural mindset, because, you know, what happens in the majority right now is that those who are not really in tune with what's going on rural-wise, they don't have that opportunity to have that conversation. You know, I've seen that on the local government committee, the way it function. I mean, there have been a lot of opportunities for us to have that conversation about how things are different, the land use planning and just the way local governments operate and the limitations that they have. So, I mean, I think that it's really important for us to have someone who's actually lived it. You know, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, as a Chelan County Commissioner for many years, I was on the legislative liaison, legislative committee for the Association of Counties, and I was communicating at that legislative level all of the concerns that we have, and it's really important for us to have someone who's lived it and has understood exactly those implications of not having that voice clearly at the table. So I do believe that representing it, we can do that.
Did you agree with or have any issues with the federal court decision that redrew the 12th to the shape it has now?
I did, and I guess, you know, when you think about the way it was first formed, because when I first started in the legislature, it was Chelan, Douglas, parts of Okanagan and Grant, all eastern Washington. But we had a bipartisan commission that really had a difficult time deciding how to get 60,000 people from the west over to the east side. And it so happened that the 12th was the district that got that east-west designation. They really labored hard. They had all four of those commissioners had different maps that they would have liked to have seen. They settled on a real difficult decision, I think, because they were supposed to be done by midnight of the night that it was done, and they didn't even make it then. But the courts, the Supreme Court even said, you know, we're good with, you know, they were good with it, and so, you know, initially. So we did have the 2 years with that, and then, of course, we've had the appeal, and which has resulted in redistricting again. But I think that the fact that we had, you know, a bipartisan commission representing all parts of the political spectrum in the state of Washington at the table and coming up with the map, I really felt like, you know, there were a lot of districts that were impacted, but it was one that we were willing to live with.
Well, Jim, understanding that the district is the district and it's the one you're running to represent, did you have any disagreements with the federal court decision that made the map what it is now?
Well, one disagreement I had with is when they made this decision. For campaigns like Keith and I are running, this is something that we plan out 12 to 18 months in advance. If we're going to serve the constituents, reach out to them and kind of talk about issues, we need a lot of time to do that. This district is now 2 times the size of the state of Delaware. It's 5 times the size of the state of Rhode Island. That's a lot of ground for us to cover. That's a lot of towns for us to get out and sort of be familiar with. So the timing I disagree with. More broadly, this is an issue that was driven by a different area down in Yakima. I don't have a particular view other than that they were struggling with something that I think is very important, which is the notion that a majority population was somehow being carved up to where they never were in the majority in any district. But as far as it relates to the 12th, I think, as I said before, I was really sort of startled when I first looked at the district. But I disagree with the notion that somehow someone from any part of the 12th district doesn't understand the rural communities that are the 12th district. The fact is that rural Snohomish Valley is very much like Wenatchee Valley. Yes, we're not growing pears or apples or cherries, but it's farming, and it's small family farms, it's some bigger farms, and we all, the way that folks live there, view issues, and the solutions that we need to those issues is very similar. So I don't agree with the notion that somehow anywhere in this 12th district that we don't understand each other. In fact, I think we can be the model to teach the state how to understand each other, and I'd love to be part of that.
Going to close with 1 minute for this response, starting with you, Jim. Why should people vote for you for Washington State Senate?
Yeah. So the big difference I have with Keith's a great guy. You just listened to him for quite a while. I've enjoyed getting to know him and talking to him. He has a great wife, great family. But the difference I have with him is not that he's somehow a problem guy. He's not. His voting is very different than how I'd vote. I look at affordable housing. 7 bills that came before the legislature just this last session. He voted against 6 of them. He voted against almost every bill to improve, funding for schools, to do something about that 60% threshold. So it's on voting. I look at all the issues we've talked about, and I will vote very differently than Keith. Well, what's behind that? My belief that we need to solve problems. And so my beef is we're not solving problems. I talked about affordable housing. We're getting farther behind. So vote for me because I'm going to go in and find ways to solve these problems.
And Keith, I'd put the same question to you in 1 minute. Why should people vote for you to move from the State House to the State Senate for the 12th District?
Well, I think that one of the things that they should look at is my voting record. And the things that I have voted against are because of the priorities that the state has had. When you look at affordable housing, right now we have millions of dollars set aside that are not actually getting put into play because some of the organizations that have secured the grants for the money have not been able to get the permits and be able to move forward with that. And so to appropriate more money, yes, I did vote on a couple of those bills because I feel like we need to be really prioritizing the real issue and finding solutions. And if we don't change our, the ideas of our land use plan, to allow for more housing in areas that could be meeting that housing need, then we're going backwards, as was mentioned. I think you look at the supply side. You look at the business climate. The poor, small business person that is struggling to try and make it work, and it's a real challenge. So I think it's really important to be sure that small business has the support they need in the state of Washington.
Keith Goehner, the Republican, Jim Mayhew, the Democrat, running for State Senate from the 12th Legislative District. Thank you both very much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. You're watching the NCW Live channel.